We have a little thought exercise to introduce. So this week and next week, we are finally talking about the bugaboo. What about Christian nationalism? Sorry? There's a new one. Yeah, we will define our terms. But as a way to introduce my point, I want to start it and then land it. We're going to go like circle back around, which is what we do. I've done this before. Sometimes we're driving to Presbytery. Come to Presbytery, it's fun. If you were drafting, this is a question that's going to only appeal to people in OPC churches probably, or Reformed churches. If you were together to put a 5-man team, and we were to do a fantasy draft, the 5 best theologians from every country, what country would win? Abraham says America. You get to pick the 5 best. Tanner. The Netherlands. Die Nederlanden. Michigan. I don't know if you know this, but that's part of the Netherlands. It's actually governed by the king of the Netherlands. It's not an American state anymore. So a country that if you pick their 5 best theologians, they'd win. They'd have the best track record. Sweden? No. Sorry. Yes. Who? Germany? I think, honestly, the best answers on the board. I think the second and third best answers are not on the board. Britain is, there would be a lot of people in Britain that wouldn't want it to be called Britain, Miss Lee. So let's split it up. I think we need to separate because they are distinct. We're going to separate Scotland and England. No. No, there's one more I think that surprisingly really needs to be on here. Wales is not bad, but I don't think it's going to go toe-to-toe. Anyone want to? It's off. Turkey. So, my Turkey. Turkey gets you Irenaeus. It gets you John Chrysostom. It gets you all of the Cappadocian fathers. There's 3 of them. Netherlands, you got your big names. Kuyper, Bavinck, Witsius. Germany, Luther, Melanchthon, Leibniz. Scotland, someone said it out loud, Rutherford. Our buddy John Knox. My buddy George Gillespie. England. You get Anselm. You get John Owen. Who?
William of Orange.
Was Dutch, technically, was the stadtholder of the Netherlands. There's a lot of Englishmen you could choose. All right, we'll come back to this. And this is unpopular. I said this to our intern. He got very agitated when I said this. I promise you, I think America wins. I really, really do. I think the greatest defender of Presbyterianism was John Witherspoon. I think the greatest systematic theologian is Charles Hodge. You can start picking any of the other Princeton theologians, Warfield, Alexander Hodge. You can go Southerners like Thornwell. Underrated as a theologian, John Gresham Machen. By the way, you get to clues, again, Thornwell, Dabney, Jonathan Edwards can be on there. We haven't even quoted all the Dutch people that left the Netherlands as soon as they were physically possible and came to America to become American citizens, including Louis Berkhoff and Cornelius Van Til, both of whom emigrated in their childhood, grew up in America, became American citizens. So pick whatever 5 you want. These 3 are inarguable. Then let's add Machen and CVT. I genuinely think the top 5 American theologians are thorough, deeper, more helpful. You've probably heard me say before, this is not an uncommon position, that although the church is continually struggling with its issues and its problems, that there is more theological clarity available to the church now than there ever has been, right? That there's a lot of issues that we've gone through that we've gotten really good understanding on. We've deepened our understanding of covenants and of eschatology and of preaching and of church government. And these things we have more clarity than we did 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. When people always want to go back to the early church, you forget the early church is having to figure out, do we really believe Jesus is God? Was the main theological issue in the 1st and 2nd century. So we do have greater theological clarity, and so I think America benefits from that, right? All the guys I quoted, Witherspoon and Hodge, they get to stand on Knox and Whitsius and Melanchthon. Probably France and Switzerland should have been in somewhere. Wherever you throw Calvin, he kind of instantly elevates a country. I'm going to pitch to you, so just remember in the back of your mind, that I will fight anybody, that the best of theologians. Now, have we also produced the worst theologians ever? Maybe. So that's America, right? Like, whatever we do, we go bigger, we go home. So it's very possible if we had our worst 5, we would also probably win that. That's okay. Now we come to, I promise we'll circle back around to this. Now we come to Christian nationalism, a hot button issue of the moment. What is Christian nationalism? So Deb was asking, is this a new Christian nationalism or the one that was a big deal about 50 years ago? This is a new one. And I'll unpack why in a minute. This is the definition I'm going to use. I think it's a good definition. It will show you all the good and all the bad that comes from it. And this is from a guy named Stephen Wolfe, who wrote a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism. Definition: a totality, should have written this beforehand, of national action has a rejoinder near civil laws and social customs conducted by a Christian nation as a Christian nation for both heavenly and earthly good. Christian nationalism is the argument that there should be a totality of national action and civil laws and social customs conducted by a Christian nation as a Christian nation for both heavenly and earthly good. Now, this definition is meant to be broad and big, right? And good definitions often are, right? You want to be able to encapsulate everything that you're talking about here. I am going to try to turn that now into 3 main arguments. So it's the totality of action. It means there's no stone left unturned. So both, and the civil law and social order is something we're going to talk about a lot. By a Christian nation, as a Christian nation. So it's a Christian, as a Christian nation means that the people there should be Christians. Christianity should be the culture. It should be the milieu. It should be baked into the recipe. And then that Christian people should govern Christianly, is what he's saying. So a Christian people govern Christianly for both heavenly and earthly good. And throughout his book, A Case for Christian Nationalism, I think the highest version of this is there is I can put it in the GroupMe, There was a recent book that came out called Reformed Christian Politics. This is, I think, a better thorough argument for Christian nationalism. Stephen Wolfe was part of it. It's also two PCA ministers named Zachary Garris and Sean McGowan. And that, I think, is a bigger, deeper argument in this direction. So what does it look like? How do we break down that big definition into component parts? I think he's arguing fundamentally Christian nationalists are arguing for three things. First, I'm going to do this alliteratively and then explain what I mean. Normative Christianity. A Christianity that is the normal way of life in the public sphere. There are parts of America where this is still very much true. What do we call that part of America? The South. And then Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? Maybe less Grand Rapids. So do we have any Southerners here? Anyone who spent any amount of time in the South? Couple. Okay. It's called the Bible Belt for a reason. One of the things I noticed moving there for seminary, you pray before a meal. And I shouldn't care about this, and I've gotten a lot better. But if you pray before meals, you all know the prayer shuffle that we do, right? I'm going to time this for the waiter or waitress. All right, we're going to pray. Oh no, the waiter's coming back, as if we should be embarrassed about praying in front of them. We shouldn't be. I've gotten over that. It took me a while. Not a problem in the South. A lot of people are praying before their meal. It's a weird thing to think about. That's a sign of a cultural hegemony. When the waitstaff expects people to be praying for a meal, and so they serve you in that manner. It's really an interesting way to do it. Another really good picture of this, I'm going to use a story from my wife, who's a nurse. She's been a nurse a long time. She was a nurse in Tucson, at a big hospital in Tucson. She's been a nurse in Phoenix. She was a nurse at the biggest hospital in Charlotte, the main one downtown. So this is the main hospital. It's their best hospital. It's the Trauma 5 or whatever. And then every night before the shift started, they would all come together and they would pray in Jesus' name. Not some kind of like well-meaning, hokey-dokey ecumenical prayer. Dear God, as you know, as we each know him individually, right? They would pray, Lord, help us be better nurses, help us with the shift, in Jesus Christ's name, amen. And then they would get out there and they would do it. So that's normative Christianity. The question is, how do we get there? The South is rapidly losing its normative Christianity. One of the struggles I found living in Charlotte was a city that desperately didn't want to be in the South, which I found embarrassing. Like, you're in the South, you might as well lean into it. But they call themselves the New South. They didn't want to be like the Old South, they're the New South. And so even if that's being lost in some parts of the South, if normative Christianity is good, I think, I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing that it is good. I assume we all think, yeah, it'd be great if a lot of people in public acted like Christians. How do you get to normative Christianity? And the argument, and this is the main thing we're going to talk about tonight, is establishmentarianism. Fun word. A sister to the longest word in the English language. Establishmentarianism, the argument that there ought to be established either state or national churches. And so it's a fairly consistent argument of kind of the new wave of Christian nationalism that there ought to be established churches. And that's how we're going to then have a normative Christianity. If the state of Pennsylvania is a Presbyterian state, and the state church is a Presbyterian state, and it gets funding from the state, and all the social programs are helped run through the Presbyterian Church of Pennsylvania, you're going to establish a normative Christianity pretty quickly. The next thing is natural law. This is where we really get into what Mrs. Bogue was talking about. Is this the old or new Christian nationalism? One of the main problems when we talk about Christian nationalism explicitly in Reform circles is that everyone automatically assumes it's theonomic. The modern wave of Christian nationalism is largely very anti-theonomic. And this book, Reformed Christian Politics, I suggested to you, has a whole chapter rebutting theonomy. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be theonomic and a Christian nationalist. I would actually suggest to you that you have to be. If you're a theonomist, you have to be a Christian nationalist because you believe all states should be run by either the explicit or the general equity version of the Mosaic Law Code. So every nation has to be this Christian nation. But that's going to be very different than this new wave of Christian nationalism. So Stephen Wolfe explicitly rejects Christian nationalism. This book, Reformed Christian Politics, explicitly rejects theonomy. And that's because they don't want the Mosaic Law Code or the Bible being the primary decider of politics, right? What they primarily want is general revelation. So if you read The Case for Christian Nationalism or if you read Reformed Christian Politics, there is a strident argument that it is the express will of God that nations be governed both constitutionally and case law by natural revelation, right? Christian nationalism is going to believe very, very strongly in something called the spirituality of the church. We've talked about this already. That the church has a purely spiritual aim and the state has the civil aim. Which means, and this is hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, but I think it's inarguably true, we've talked about there were 4 schools before, right? There was magisterial to kingdom, this idea that the church is like a tutor or a teacher to the state. It doesn't run it or control it, but there's an interplay. We talked about sphere sovereignty, that everything should be Christian, but the state should be Christian in a very different way that churches are, in a very different way than families are. We talked about theonomy, right? That God's law, specifically the civil laws of the Old Testament, are the charter. They would say both constitutional and case law, both the foundations and the specifics ought to come out of the Bible, theonomists would say. And then we talked about what's called reformed two kingdom, sometimes radical two kingdom, right? That actually civil government should be morally neutral, spiritually neutral, religiously neutral, not morally neutral, that's impossible, but it should be religiously neutral, and so special revelation of the church shouldn't have any unique influence in the state. So here's what's interesting about modern Christian nationalism, is it actually is very similar in a lot of its arguments to the R2K position. And this is something a lot of people struggle to get hands with, because most people that believe in a reformed or a radical or a real two-kingdom position very much do not want Christian-influenced laws. But that's exactly what Wolfe and Garris and McGowan argue for. I don't want church-structured, theology-structured, Bible-structured laws either. They do want Christian-influenced laws, but like R2K, they're coming at it from a position of natural revelation, right? And that fundamental similarity is actually runs very, very deep. And then the third, obviously, so constitutionally, Christian nationalism, R2K, are going to have the same kind of constitutional law. They're going to have radically different case law. The way they want each area to be governed is going to be the complete opposite. But the foundation is actually the same. And the third kind of big thing here is what I'm going to call national. It's not the easiest word to spell. That's not that hard. National homogeneity. So the idea is that this goes back to the social order aspect of this, right? Is that we're not just concerning ourselves with civil laws. We want the culture and the people and the nation to have a shared emphasis and a shared focus, right? That kind of connects a little bit up to here, but it is fundamentally, this is through law and this is through cultural pressure, right? Institutions, schools, individuals. And so national homogeneity is a large part of Christian nationalism, which is where the nationalism connection is often made in the hearts and minds of people. I'm only going to talk about this tonight. And then our intern Caleb Graham's going to come back next week and he's going to talk about these two issues. Last bit of introduction before we dive into Christian nationalism. This is one of my favorite songs. It's called Don't You Do It. One of the things that really plagues the Christian nationalism conversation is an issue that we were trying to rebut with this whole series, is that it quickly slips into pejoratives, right? Just insults, right? So if you are a Christian nationalist, you're XYZ. If you're not a Christian nationalist, you're XYZ. And that's why the very first lesson we talked about some logical fallacies. And we want to give you all of the things. So wherever you land, I've been making the case for 4 weeks that you should have a magisterial two-kingdom, the Calvin, Rutherford, Puritan. That's what I think you should be. But we've given the other positions. You've heard other people come up here, Doug and Caleb and Dylan, say, here's kind of some pushback on some areas. So what are the two? I want to point out two problems on each side that we can fall into. Pro and con. If you are in favor of Christian nationalism and a part of that burgeoning moment, I really think that people need to watch out. I read an article called this, you need to watch out for Control F history. What does a Control F on the keyboard do for you? Find. I say this non-insultingly, pejoratively. I have the receipts. If anyone really disagrees, Caleb and I have about 50 examples between these two books. One of the strengths of the Christian nationalism movement is that it has been in a lot of ways ad fontes, like the theonomy and R2K have been ideas very much grounded in the last 50 to 70 years. And so what Christian nationalism has done is, what did Calvin say? What did Rutherford say? What did the Puritans say? What did Althusius and Junius and all these guys say? That's been really great. But there has been a really consistent problem where the historiography has been really, really sloppy. And the sign that it's sloppy is found in two ways. Control F history, Control Find. What happens is you get a JSTOR subscription, you pull some ancient Puritan document, and you Control F for blasphemy laws. You Control F for Sabbath. And part of the problem there is that historical research has structure like any other form of research does, right? The form of research we're most familiar with probably from public school is the scientific method. You have a theory, and then you test it, and you have a control group, right? That's the theory of research. One of the most important things in historical research, that was my undergrad degree, and my focus in seminary was historical theology, is primary sources. But not just primary sources, but what we call primary source citation or attestation. So what happens a lot is people will Control F these documents and find John Owen being like, no, of course we should execute Baptists. See, John Owen said that. But they're not realizing that John Owen's quoting someone saying that. And then 3 paragraphs later, he's like, by the way, that guy was crazy, wrong, right? Don't listen to Richard Baxter, he's the worst. This happens a lot. It's scary how often this happens. So rather than reading, you can just search for terms and you have improper citation, which is the problem. That's a very sloppy problem. The bigger problem is old doesn't equal good. This is the biggest thing. The biggest example is the Puritans. You hear Puritans and you think, good theology. To be a Puritan, you had to be a Christian in the United Kingdom between the years of like 1580 and 1730, and you had to not be a diehard Anglican or a Catholic. That basically made you a Puritan. That's who we call the Puritans. Anyone who is a nonconformist, not a member of the state church, wanted better theology. John Bunyan, Baptist, kind of believed in perfectionism, that Christians don't have to sin anymore, Puritan. John Owen, Paedo-Baptist, but anti-Presbyterian, Congregationalist, Puritan. Richard Baxter, if you don't do enough good works, you're going to go to hell, Puritan. Samuel Rutherford, classic teacher of all things Presbyterian, Puritan. So Puritan doesn't mean good theology any more than Dutch means good theology. It's a historical marker. And so the problem is you will find absolutely theologians in England in 1620 saying, the only way to have a good Protestant nation is to have a Protestant king who executes Catholics. Yeah, you'll find guys saying that. And I'm not saying you can't quote them. We'll get into that in a minute. But there's a lot of this thing where you go back and you find an old author to prove that the point is correct. Finding citations is part of building an argument. It's not an argument in itself, right? And so we need to watch out for Control F history when you're doing this. The other problem, though, here, if you're against it, is what's called the genetic fallacy. Or sometimes this comes out as guilt by association. Don't do that if you're against Christian nationalism. What's the genetic fallacy? You know who believed in Christian nationalism? Hitler. Which he didn't, by the way. He hated Jesus. Do you know who believed in Christian nationalism? The Crusades. There's your Christian nationalism. Do you know who believed in Christian nationalism? John Calvin. And he executed Servetus. Well, there might be an argument that John Calvin did believe in Christian nationalism, but you know who would execute heretics in 1570? Every single human being living in Europe. That was a unanimous position, except for some Quakers in like Western Cornwall, England, that no one wanted to talk about. But the idea that you execute heretics was a unanimous, that doesn't make it right, by the way. I think it's wrong. But you can't do the genetic fallacy. Just because they were Christians in the past who made these arguments and then did bad things doesn't make the argument bad. That's also guilt by association, right? That's not to say that historical evidence doesn't matter. It does. Most logical fallacies are born because they want to end debate, right? Christian nationalism did a crusade. Crusades are bad. Can't be Christian nationalist. Well, if you want to bring up the Crusades, let's talk about the Crusades. Were all the Crusades bad? Were they all the same thing? How do you compare the Crusades versus the Muslim jihads and the holy wars that the Muslims were doing? How do we weigh these things? That's a fine debate. And maybe that will be a good argument against Christian nationalism. But don't do genetic fallacy or guilt by association. The other problem, don't do this if you're a pro-Christian nationalist. It's called the flank problem. Or the modern term for this is a purity spiral. Does anyone know what either of those are? Flank problem, purity spiral. So the flank problem is a problem in military strategy. Flanking is just kind of how you win. And a lot of military strategies is how do we create a flank? How do you overload part of the enemy defenses, wherever they are? And the great thing about overloading an enemy defenses, there aren't any bad guys there. So you start flanking, and one of the problems that would happen, and Alexander had this problem, is you see your buddy going around a corner, there's no one there, and what do you decide you should do? I want to go around the corner too. There's no bad guys there. And then, let's all go around the corner, and now everyone's kind of abandoning their post. And this is actually a consistent problem in kind of ancient military strategy, was people always want to be on the flank. And now we call it a purity spiral. You need to prove more and more that you really, really belong. There's no way that you're a liberal. There's no way you're a conservative. And let me show you, right? I wish the Republican Party doesn't exist. Well, I think Republicans should be illegal. Well, I think Republicans should be killed, right? That kind of purity spiral. This is a problem for minority issues more than majority issues. Majority issues don't, I'm not saying that makes it right or wrong, but majority issues don't feel the need to flank or purity spiral because they're winning. And sometimes that can breed complacency, which leads to losing. So Christian nationalism is inarguably a minority position. First off, in America, it's like minority, minority, minority. Even among Reformed Christianity, it's largely a minority position. More popular, but still not the main position. So you just got to be careful, again, that we kind of like don't do a fallacy, figure out what you believe, and maybe you just end up on the flank. Congratulations to you. But don't simply go on the flank because you're trying to outflank everyone else. Other problem, similar but different, is what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery, which is something that you can do if you're against Christian nationalism, because Christian nationalism does cite a lot of history, and it's going to pull from a lot of old arguments. And so everyone goes, well, yeah, they believed those things, but they also thought you could turn coal into gold. And they also, most hospitals until James Lister and we discovered germ theory, the labor and delivery ward of the hospital was on the same floor as the morgue because they thought it was like poetic. That was like, it's kind of neat, huh? Dying and coming to life on the same floor. And then James Lister, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch Reformed ruling elder, invented the microscope, saw the things in there. James Lister goes, those things are making people sick. By the way, you're keeping all the babies where all of those dead people are. It's a bad idea, right? So we can go, oh, look how dumb they were. The same people that wanted Christian nationalism didn't know about germs. They must be wrong. That's chronological snobbery, because there's a lot of things that we hold to very dearly that they also believed in. So something believing it a long time ago doesn't make it wrong, and we need to combat that. I'm going to erase every country except for America, as it should be. I'm kidding. Before I get into my critique, well, let me set this up, and then I'll let questions while I'm erasing. My thesis, Caleb's thesis, is going to be, by and large, the term Christian nationalism is unhelpful. Best case scenario, you are grabbing an anchor as it is going into the ocean and tying it to your belt. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person for doing it, but I think by and large the term is now unhelpful for two reasons. It's unhelpful, I think, primarily because of opponents of Christianity in America have made it unhelpful. And that can happen. Sometimes the enemy takes the high ground and you move on. And so the simple case now is Christian nationalism is just now the byword for Christians vaguely existing in public, right? And every time a Christian does anything, they go, it's Christian nationalism, right? And it's always this way the left tries to cut conservative Christianity out of the public sphere, even though we've gone through this. Conservative Christianity was what founded America. Because the problem is that the progressive wing of this country has never had a problem with religion and politics. There is only one ordained minister in the United States Senate right now. Does anyone know who it is? Raphael Warnock, the very liberal senator from Georgia. That's Christian nationalism. That's illegal. That's terrible. So one, the simple truth is now it's become impossible to use as a defined term because now it just means anything a Christian says, right? The other problem is there are bad faith actors. I do not think that Christian nationalism is necessarily kinist. We'll get into kinism, which is a more specific argument for a racial priority that I think is sinful. There's nothing about Christian nationalism that is necessarily racist or kinist at all. I don't think even Stephen Wolfe is kinist. I think his book is very, very sloppy on that category. That's why I was recommending the book that he wrote with those other authors, which is far less sloppy when it comes to cultural hegemony and things like race. But I don't think Stephen Wolfe, I think that's a pretty bad faith argument to say that he's a racist or a kinist. There are racists and kinists who love using the term Christian nationalists, right? They absolutely exist, and some of us know who they are. You don't always let bad faith actors steal terms from you. I understand that. Sometimes you have to reclaim terms. But when a term in the public sphere either just means progressives insulting everything any Christian does ever, or it also sometimes means racial kinist arguments that we find abhorrent, it's now a term I'm going to argue that's largely devoid of value. So my pitch is, let's come up with a better word. I think that Christian nationalism is necessarily set against what I would call magisterial two-kingdom. A lot of Christians now say, no, that's where we are. And Caleb will get into next week why that's not true. I would say that a lot of the goals of Christian nationalism, specifically this one, I totally agree with. One of the things I argued for in my class on magisterial two-kingdom theology is that America was founded by what I called a Protestant social order. That even the people who weren't Protestants understood that America was a Protestant country full of Protestant people governed by Protestant ideas. I think that is absolutely correct. That's what I want. That's what I want us to get back to. That's what I want for everybody. And that's a large part of the argument of Christian nationalism is let's just be a Protestant nation. I think insofar as that's done through social customs, I totally agree. Let's have Protestant social customs. Let's have Protestant institutions. Let's make Protestant arguments. My main argument against it is going to be right here. It's going to be primarily this is why I'm doing tonight and Caleb's doing the next 2 weeks. I have a very big problem with establishmentarianism. I think it is a big, bad idea. It doesn't work. It's not biblical. It's not reformed. We shouldn't do it. And I don't want you to want to do it either. And I may not convince you. I know at least 2 theonomists that became more theonomist after I argued against theonomy. So if that happens tonight, then more power to you. Before I get into the argument, we said that it was normalized Christianity, natural law to guide our political philosophy, and then national homogeneity. We're just doing the idea of normalized Christianity through state churches. I'm going to argue why that's a bad idea. Before I get into that, anything that I've said so far, are there any questions, things people want to dive into? Mrs. Paddocks.
Could you give an example of the overlap between R2K and, because you said at the beginning,
Yes.
example of a law that
Well, it wouldn't so much be in terms of laws. Again, I think specific laws, I think Christian nationalism and R2K are going to be very, very different, right? Or Christian nationalism is going to argue in favor of blasphemy laws, which I want, right? I would say similar with Christian nationalism, I think the argumentation is flawed. I think the term has just become useless. I want a lot of the goals that Christian nationalism wants. I just want to pitch you that there's a better way. But I appreciate a lot what they're going for. Not the bad faith actors, obviously. So the laws would be different. The big similarity would be through social order. The 2 people that you will find most stridently tell you that you should not care about your pastor's political opinions are Michael Horton and Stephen Wolfe. Right? Michael Horton and I, both brothers in Christ. Michael Horton, seminary professor at Westminster, California, URC minister, very strident, very public, the biggest public advocate of R2K besides David Van Drunen. He's going to say, you shouldn't listen to your pastor's political opinions. They're a spiritual advisor. They have spiritual duties. That's called the spirituality of the church. And the other person who believes that very strongly is Stephen Wolfe. Your pastor doesn't know what he's talking about, which is largely true, but I appreciate these pushbacks. The amount of things I don't know could stun a team of oxen in their tracks, right? I do think we need to, it's a very American thing for your pastor to be your health advisor, your money advisor, your political advisor. I studied Greek, y'all. That's what I studied theology. So there are good points to that. But a lot of the social arguments, right? Stephen Wolfe and 2K people are going to be very, very strident against churches being involved politically themselves. So churches leading voter registration drives, churches preaching politics from the pulpit, churches operating as political entities. Wolfe and Horton have very different arguments why they don't want that, but they both fundamentally don't really want it, right? Wolfe's argument is going to be that they're bad at it, which is not a bad argument. I mean, we know how to play hymns, we know how to preach the gospel, we know how to disciple Christians in holiness, we know how to rebuke sin. I don't know how to do an equitable tax law. And nothing about us being Christians mean that we necessarily know how to do, And then Horton's argument is going to be whether or not they're good at it, it's wrong for them to do it, right? That the church should be so focused on its primarily spiritual mission that it's engaging in mission creep. It's just doing stuff it's not supposed to do. So I would say most of the agreement between R2K and Christian Wolfian and Christian nationalism is on social customs, social order, the role of the church, the role of a minister. They're going to be very, very similar. And again, that's just one stream of Christian nationalism, and that's just one stream of R2K. But I'm saying that there are some fundamental ties there, right? It's a good question. Right.
That is a different function.
Absolutely.
And it is well suited to the government to
Right.
undermission them, not because they're bad at it, but because it's a fundamentally different category.
Right, and that's very well said, Annalise, that they're fundamentally different categories. And this is also going to come through in the natural law part of it. Right? Wolfian and Christian nationalism is going to argue that natural law is the overwhelming determiner of what we call jurisprudence. What are fair laws fairly applied? And that's what R2K believes as well. Neither one of them want you quoting Exodus to come up with. Now again, I think all theonomists are kind of Christian nationalists. And so famously, Stephen Wolfe's book was published by theonomists. But even when it was published, they both kind of like, well, we don't agree with each other on how we do this. We want the same goals, but we have very different approach vectors. So that's a very good question, Annalise. Yes, Mr. Murdoch.
Correct me if I'm wrong, David, wasn't the term Christian originally coined by outsiders?
Yes.
Christ followers, almost as a pejorative.
Right? Yeah.
Century.
Yeah.
And so we won that term over.
Yeah, we did.
So
Yeah.
I guess my point is
Yeah.
Christian nationalism,
Right.
similarly, right, is
Yeah.
a pejorative,
Yeah.
but we could still win it over to our side.
Yeah, so that's what we would call a pedagogical argument, right? Like, what's the best way to go about this? Not is it right or wrong, right? Like, it's not a sin to call yourself a Christian nationalist. It's not a sin to call yourself a non-Christian nationalist. So it's pedagogical. What's the best way forward? I think the way that we won the Christian debate was that we made everyone Christians, right? It wasn't so much that we kind of won the debate on whether it was a good term. It's just that Constantine converted and then Rome became a Christian empire, and all of a sudden, everyone wanted to be the thing. So I think the best way to make Christian nationalism a good term is to make everyone a Christian, which I don't think anyone is against, right? Amen, right? Let's have revival. Right, oh yeah, I mean, then you're kind of like, well, now we're splitting hairs, right? Like, if you're all Christians, then what are we doing? So, yeah, my pitch is I really am thankful for the recovery process that Christian nationalism started. I think it's been an overall force for good. But I think when you do that recovery process, one of the terms I wished we had pushed back against harder was Calvinists. In part because John Calvin hated that. He was buried in an unmarked grave so that no one could make a big deal out of him. And Calvinist. And now all of a sudden, like, that's the main thing, at least, I don't know about y'all, but I hear when I talk to non-reformed, oh, you're a Calvinist. I go, no. I mean, I like him a lot, But my wife gave me eyes. Okay, I like him a lot. I really like John Calvin. That's fair. But I don't follow Apollos. Like, I don't follow a man. John Calvin would hate that phrase. Actually, and also Calvinism, that's another example of a term that's become, I think, harmful. Not just because it's a pejorative, but because it makes people think that the main thing Reformed theology is about predestination. You know who believes in predestination? The Roman Catholic Church. That's not us distinctive, right? The rejection of predestination is actually a minority position born out of first Pelagius and then Jacobus Arminius. So if you ask John Calvin, there's a really important book called On the Necessity of Reforming the Church. I can't recommend it highly enough. Have to read it. If you read this book, John Calvin says there are 4 reasons we had to do the Protestant Reformation. Guess what's not one of the 4 reasons? Predestination. So that's a very good point, Norm. I mean, I want to give you credit. Yeah, like Christian was a pejorative that we won over. Calvinist was a pejorative that we lost, and I think it's been largely unhelpful. Because now it's centered the debate on something that matters but is lesser. And the other thing it's done is it's enabled people to call themselves Calvinist because they believe in predestination. We actually call them the New Calvinists. It was on the cover of Time magazine, if you can believe it, 26 years ago. The New Calvinists. And so the people, there's a lot of churches in town. Oh, we're Reformed. And you go, what do you mean you're Reformed? What do you mean? They go, oh, we're Calvinists. And I'm already like, oh, shoot. All right. What do you mean we're Calvinists? Oh, I believe in predestination. I'm like, okay. Well, you know, John Calvin thought that doing anything in worship not expressly given a word is a great and terrible sin. Do you agree with John Calvin on that? Oh, well, no. We do skits and we do dance. Yeah, okay. Maybe you're not a Calvinist, right? So that's a term I think we lost on, and it's been very harmful, right? Is now there are these churches that people think are Reformed, and the only thing they believe in predestination, which is great. But to quote Charles Spurgeon, predestination is just the gospel. That's just saying that God saved you and that you didn't save yourself, right? But when Calvin said, what is the Reformation about? He said, justification by faith alone, the sole authority of the Scriptures. And he said the 2 main issues were the reformation of church government and the reformation of worship. He said those are the 2 most important things. So I want to give Norm credit. You're right. Christian was a pejorative we won. Calvinist was a pejorative we lost. I'm going to argue that Christian nationalism is going to be more like Calvinism, an ultimately unhelpful term. But there's an argument that if we take it and we, get rid of the kinists and the racists and push back, then maybe it can become a helpful term. And that's fair game. I would say agree to disagree. Any more questions before we get into establishmentarianism? Mrs. Bogue. Go for it. So there are 2 books. One is The Case for Christian Nationalism, on the necessity of reforming the church. Excellent book. You can read it in like 2 or 3 hours, I promise. It's pretty short. Okay, any more questions before we get into establishmentarianism? All right, what I want you to do is grab a red Psalter hymnal underneath the seat in front of you. For we are, ladies and gentlemen, in a Presbyterian church. And I want you to open to page 933, which is, 933, we will find chapter 23, which is on the civil magistrate. And I will read it. It's a long one, but I'm going to read it. Paragraph 3. Civil magistrates may not assume to themselves the administration of the word or sacraments, or the power of the keys of the kingdom of heaven, or in the least interfere in matters of faith. I'll read that again because it's pretty aggressive. Or, in the least, interfere in matters of faith. Yet as nursing fathers, it is the duty of civil magistrates to protect the church of our common Lord, without giving the preference of any denomination of Christians above the rest, in such a manner that all ecclesiastical persons, whatever, shall enjoy the full, free, and unquestioned liberty of discharging every part of their sacred functions without violence or danger. And as Jesus Christ has appointed a regular government and discipline in his church, no law of any commonwealth should interfere with, let, or hinder the due exercise thereof among the voluntary members of any denomination of Christians, according to their own professions and belief. It is the duty of the civil magistrate to protect the person and good name of all their people in such an effectual manner as that no person will be suffered, either upon pretense of religion or of infidelity, to offer any indignity, violence, abuse, or injury to any person whatsoever, and to take order that all religious and ecclesiastical assemblies be held without molestation or disturbance. This is the heart of the American revisions to the Westminster Standards, which come from around 1787. I don't know if I have the year exact. The original 1646 version of the Westminster Confession of Faith had a very different paragraph there. And that paragraph in 1646 specifically commended the civil magistrate to interfere in matters of faith, to be able to convene church councils and synods, higher levels of church government, to participate in those church government structures, to suppress heresy, to punish infidelity in Scripture, and to uphold the true common faith of our Lord. So this is a big difference. There have been arguments online by people I very much respect and like, including James Baird, whose book, King of Kings, I thought was really good, and I agree with largely. But I think these are bad historical arguments that this change does not represent a fundamental change of the original confession. I think there are two clauses that make that really historically impossible to argue. One is, or in the least interfere in matters of faith. And the second is, no law of any commonwealth should interfere with, let, or hinder the due exercise thereof among the denominations of Christians. Those are what we would call truly exclusive clauses. There is no loophole in them, right? The American revision said very firmly that we do not want the civil magistrate. Now, and the term civil magistrate, we've gone through this, is important because it doesn't mean the president. What does the civil magistrate mean? Any level of civil authority. That means city council, that means mayor, it means governor, it means Congress, it means president, it means king, it means duke, it means consuls, it means the people's tribune, whatever your form of government is. Shall not interfere in the matters in the least. So I want to make the argument for you that establishmentarianism is a very, very bad idea. First, I want to make the argument for you biblically. I really struggle. I think the argument for establishmentarianism works great for Lutherans. It works great for Baptists, and it works great for Catholics. And I'm not calling Baptists Catholics. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying both of their political systems. Because Baptists and Catholics have polar opposite views of ordination. By and large, the Baptist or Congregationalist view of ordination is very, very low. Anyone can be a pastor, right? And we have youth pastor Charlie. Charlie's been a youth pastor for like 6 years. Maybe he did 2 years of Bible learning school, and now he's been a youth pastor. And Pastor Charlie's youth group is now like 200 people. And Pastor Charlie wakes up and he tells the church, I got a message from the Lord, and it's time for me to start a church. And good news, an old Target just became available, and we're going to buy it. And it's going to be called Valley Bible of the Desert Church. And let's go, we're going. And now there's a church, right? The Catholics have the opposite view. Like ordination it makes you a better person. You're no longer one of the dirty, unwashed plebes. You are sacred. You're doing sacred work unto the Lord. Because of that, a Congregationalist or Baptist view of church structure is going to say, well, if anyone can be a pastor, then why can't the president? Why can't the mayor? Right? Why can't, if Pastor Charlie can decide to be a pastor because he got a word from the Lord and he was doing a successful youth ministry and he bought himself a Target, if he can interfere in matters of religion, then why can't the mayor? You see the connection there, right? There's no kind of bar of ordination in order to hold the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And for the Catholics, it's really simple. The Pope has the key, so he gets to tell the magistrate what to do. He gets to tell the magistrate how to interfere. But broadly, the broader Protestant consensus is very, very important in Matthew 16 and Matthew 18. All of the synoptic gospels have basically at their thematic middle this moment where Jesus turns to Peter and he says, who do you say that I am? And Peter responds, Matthew 16, 18. Does anyone know it? Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Peter responds and he says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. You didn't decide to. He says, the Spirit of God has revealed this to you. And I tell you, thou art Peter. That's when Simon's name gets changed. Thou art Peter, which is the word for rock. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and the very gates of hell will not prevail against you. And I tell you, what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. That's a pretty aggressive charge. So the question throughout church history is, who do the keys go to? We know the Catholic argument. Peter gets them because Peter's the first pope. The problem, of course, is that the Bible doesn't say that he's the pope. He's never treated as in charge. Actually, the only time that Peter interacts with the church broadly is when he doesn't speak at all at the Jerusalem Council and when he gets rebuked by Paul in front of everyone in the book of Galatians. And we also have zero early church attestation for 300 years that the Pope was first among equals. And when the Catholic Church started to really start asserting that problem around 800 to about 1000 AD, what did the Eastern Orthodox Church think of that argument? Peace, yeah, we're out. No, we don't agree. So that's the Catholic argument. The Congregationalist argument is people who believe have the keys. People who believe have the keys, right? The problem with this argument is you have a house. Keys are supposed to open and lock something. The keys are supposed to give someone access and prevent people from access. If every person in the city of Phoenix has keys to my house, no one has keys to my house. My house doesn't have keys. And the other problem with that is what Jesus goes on to tell them is what you bind on earth. So that means that every Christian alive, I have a 5-year-old. Does my 5-year-old possess the keys of the kingdom of heaven? Because I tell you what he's binding on earth is no bedtime. And what he's binding on earth is chocolate milk with every meal. And he goes on to say this in Matthew 18. In Matthew 18, this is really important. He references Matthew 16. Matthew 18, why do we all know that chapter? We actually use it as a verb. Have you Matthew 18'd him yet? Have you Matthew 18'd her yet? What is Matthew 18 about? Discipline. Go to your brother one-on-one. Rebuke them. And if they don't listen, take a brother. And then tell it to the church. And if they don't tell it to, by the way, tell it to who? The church. And if they don't listen to the church, then they're put out. Who has the keys in that situation? The church. And he goes on to talk about, and the reason that you can excommunicate people, Jesus says, quoting himself, Matthew 18, he says, you can excommunicate people because I have given you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. It's a pretty direct argument that it's the church that has the keys. Not one man, the Pope, not every man, everyone else. The church has the keys. What does that mean, who doesn't have the keys? Everyone else, which includes the civil magistrate. Doesn't have the keys. I would argue aggressively, they have no right. Calvin would argue aggressively they have no right. This is why Calvin got kicked out of Geneva. Calvin was reforming, and he was, again, very magisterial. He would go to the town council meetings. They would invite him, and they would do stuff. He'd be like, you can't do that. That's the night. You can't lie. Don't do that. I'm going to tell you what the Word of God says, and I'll inform you. But he didn't have a vote. Wasn't governing. But then there were some church discipline matters that came up that specifically applied to members of the town council and their family members. And so they went to Calvin and said, don't discipline those people. Calvin said, you have no right to interfere here. And they said, no, we're just helping you reform. Like, you don't have the right understanding of church discipline. And we're just, you kind of have they actually said, you kind of have a Catholic understanding and need to be more Anabaptist. And Calvin's response was, that's great. I don't care what you think. Are you an elected member of the session? They call it a consistory. Are you a member of the consistory? If someone laid hands on you, you're ordained by God, you're not. I don't care. And they said, well, then you should pound whatever they have in Switzerland, not sand. Wet moss, I guess. And he goes up to Strasbourg. And after several years, they realize they mess up, and they beg him to come back down to Geneva. So my argument is very aggressive in this. Matthew 16, 19, Matthew 18, 17 through 18. Even John, chapter 20. Father has sent me, I am sending you. Who is he talking to? The apostles, who Paul says in Ephesians are the foundation of the church. And from the foundation of the church in Ephesians chapter 2 comes who? Pastors, evangelists, teachers, elders, deacons, the government of the church. I am sending you. If you forgive their sins, they will be forgiven. So I think there is an aggressive biblical argument that it is wrong for the civil magistrate to interfere in matters of faith. This comes up a lot for us when we explain the Reformed argument of why you shouldn't just baptize people in your backyard, or why you shouldn't have communion at your wedding, which are not popular positions right now. 1,998 years of church history would agree don't do those things, but right now it's very unpopular. And we'll go, well, who are you to say my granddaddy can't baptize me? And I respond, who told your granddaddy he could baptize people? Sacraments are given by the Lord Jesus Christ, and they're given to the church. They're not given to Christians individually. This is American individualism. We always read, when you hear you think me. The Bible's about Nick Barefoot. The Bible's about Ethan Lee. Right? So it says, go baptize. Let's talk. So I'm me. I better go baptize. Except the Bible is, guess what? Matthew 28. Is that in the first person plural? First person singular? It is not. Second person plural. Y'all. The church baptizes. And so if the church has the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and the church has the sacraments given to the Lord, who exercises authority in the church? Well, surely you're not going to argue that your granddaddy has authority in the church just because he's your granddaddy. What about my granddaddy? I don't know if you all know this, but my granddaddy could beat your granddaddy up. So where does this break down, right? No, if it's given to the church, then those who have authority in the church wield, and the same thing, it's fascinating, is exactly Paul's logic in Romans 13 for the civil magistrate. Who has the authority to wield the sword to punish evil? Not the church. The civil magistrate is a minister of the Lord. He has been given the sword. Does that mean everyone who lives under the civil magistrate gets a sword? I think it's one of the interesting things for Protestants. None of us treat the civil magistrate that way. We don't all think we're Batman, and I can do whatever I want in terms of civil justice. Why do we think that's true of the church all of a sudden? I mean, to be blunt, what's the more important institution? One of them is going to continue, one of them is going to fade away, right? So the argument that civil magistrate should be involved, you have other verses too that I think are important about this. 1 Corinthians 5 tells the church to purge the evil person from among you. The magistrate is not a part of that. And so I think that's really important. The second thing we will say is that it confuses the two kingdoms. And we talked about that every Protestant believes in the two kingdoms. Right? It's Catholic to reject that there are two separate institutions. Christian nationalists believe in that. I'm not saying that they're confusing. I'm saying that establishmentarianism confuses that. This is John Calvin from the Institutes, Book 4, Chapter 11, Paragraph 1. The spiritual power of the church is and must always be wholly distinct from the power of the sword. So this is about, again, good church history. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, the weapons of warfare are not of the flesh, but our weapons have divine power to destroy strongholds. So my problem with establishmentarianism is that you are fighting a spiritual battle with weaker weapons. This is a classic mission creep. We are choosing to fight with dull blades when we use the civil magistrate to create some kind of Protestant social order. And the problem, of course, with this is that it is historically, again, we don't do the genetic fallacy, but the historical argument is pretty thorough, right? That religious tolerance is the invention of the Protestant Reformation. There's a really good book I want you to read if you're really interested in political theology. It's called The Emergence of Liberty in the Modern World. I'll write it right here. The Emergence of Liberty in the Modern World. It was written by one of my professors, Douglas Kelly. And again, this, in a lot of ways, this would seem like a very Christian nationalist argument. I don't want to shy away from that. What he does is he points out, he goes through several different countries, and he points out, he goes through 5 countries. I have 3 of them on my mind. It's the Netherlands. Oh, no, it's Netherlands, England, Scotland, America. I'm forgetting the 5th country. When the Protestant Reformation happens, the wealthiest and most important countries in the world, and specifically in Europe, are Spain, which is a Catholic country, stays a Catholic country. After that is the Holy Roman Empire, which is a collection of Catholic countries that controls most of Italy and Germany. And they dominate European warfare and government for 500 years. And you only ever hear of England popping up on the national scene when they win a plucky battle against all odds. Right, that's Agincourt, the Thin Red Line. And then within 2 years of the Protestant Reformation, the wealthiest country in the world is the Netherlands, and the most powerful country in the world is Great Britain. And his argument is, why? Protestant social order. Where Protestantism goes, it creates liberty, and where liberty goes, there is flourishing. And so some of this liberty is things like the Catholic Church, out of a misunderstanding of the Bible, shocker, the Catholic Church misunderstands the Bible. The Catholic Church banned loans for like 1,500 years. You just couldn't get a loan. And there's a lot of predatory lending now, and we think that sounds good. None of us could own homes if we couldn't get a loan, which is what happened, right? You wonder, where does medieval serfdom come from? And the answer is the Catholic Church put a stranglehold in wealth and put it in the hands of only the richest. There was no way for anyone to create new wealth, which is what interest does. There's only one group of people that were allowed to do loans, and it was Jews, which then created a lot of anti-Semitism, because all of a sudden the Jews have a lot of money, because they're the only people that aren't following these really stupid rules. The Reformation comes, people read their Bibles, and they're like, that's not what usury. Usury isn't a 3% interest loan on a house. This is ridiculous. Oh, you just had these laws because the King of France was bribing you. So the Netherlands and England opened up the very first stock markets. People allowed to have private property. They're allowed to have interest. They're allowed loans. What happens? Wealth explodes. But the other thing that happens is religious tolerance. Religious tolerance is what Calvin argues for. Now, religious tolerance doesn't mean religious pluralism. We've talked about this previously. Calvin argues aggressively for religious tolerance and also thinks that Michael Servetus should be executed. So these are spectrums, right? Calvin's religious tolerance was bona fide Christians. England's religious tolerance was bona fide Christians plus Catholics. And that kind of carried over to America, right? There was one founding father that was one person signed the Declaration of Independence was a Catholic. And the other 80 were not, right? Or 60 were not. So I'm not prescribing what form of religious liberty tolerance. That's a thing we can all agree, have different stands on. But the problem with establishmentarianism is that at the very best, it is taking the knees out from religious tolerance, which the American Presbyterians argued is necessary for a flourishing of a people. Because what it allows you to do, when there are not established religions, what it allows you to do is make full faith arguments in the public square for the truth, right? And so people will point out, did the American states have state religions when the Constitution was passed? Yes, they did. How many of them had state religions 30 years later? 2 of them. How many of them had state religions 50 years later? None of them. And that wasn't because they got more liberal. I can't make that argument. America in 1820 is more religious than it is in 1776, right? The Civil War, the Second Great Awakening, that's when you really start to see religiosity change in America. But up until the American Civil War, America's religiosity, and this is the book I mentioned earlier, Religion and Republic by Miles Smith, I find very compelling. America's religiosity only really increases up to the Civil War. Because when the Civil War breaks out, every argument made in favor of the Civil War by both sides is God wants us to do this. No one is making very atheistic arguments, right? God is wanting us to preserve our liberties, what the South said. God is wanting us to preserve the Union or free the slaves, is what the North said. So on the matter of the Scripture, on the matter of systematic theology, and on the matter of practical theology, I want to make an argument that establishmentarianism is a bad idea. It doesn't work, it's unbiblical, and it's fighting with dull weapons. Now I'll end on this positive note. I say this because I want, in this aspect of a Protestant social order, what I see most Christian nationalists argue for. I want everyone to be Protestant. And I want the people that are Protestants, I want them to act like they are Protestant. I don't want them to lie about their religion, but I want them to live in protest. That doesn't really work, but it sounds cool. I want them to live Protestantly. And so you can see like my dedicated argument against establishmentarianism is because my concern is that in doing it, we're going to lose. I want to win. From the bottom of my heart, I want to win. I want America to be a Christian nation. Establishmentarianism is a step in the wrong direction. I firmly believe that. The American founders believe that. At least 12 of them were Presbyterians. Another 12 were Congregationalists, which is another term for pseudo-Presbyterians. And within 50 years, the Congregationalist churches in America have merged into the Presbyterian church. And so if you combine Presbyterians and Congregationalists, it is the overwhelming largest group that signed the Declaration of Independence, right? We're people from our tradition. I said earlier, who has the best theologians? I said we did. If I can appeal, if nothing else, to your patriotism, every single one of these men was against establishmentarianism. John Witherspoon wrote the revisions to the American Westminster Confession of Faith. Witherspoon, Hodge, Warfield, Alexander Hodge, Burkhoff, Cornelius Van Til, Jay Mitchell, John Murray, John Edwards, Dabney and Thornwell, the Southern Presbyterians, were the most against establishmentarianism. They were the most aggressively. I would think that Thornwell and Dabney would be the closest to Wolfian Christian nationalism that anyone that's ever lived. And they hated establishmentarianism. They were the most aggressive against it. So if you want a Protestant social order in this country, and hopefully I convinced that you have that 5 weeks ago. Maybe I haven't. But I think you should want a Protestant social order in this country. I think that's a biblical thing to want. I think that will never be accomplished through establishmentarianism. I think it will be accomplished not through civil laws, but entirely through social customs. All right, 7:34. Questions, pushback, thoughts? I don't believe there's nothing. Yes?
So you said that pastors being involved in politics,
Right.
not a good idea. I generally agree.
Bet.
But can you talk a little bit about where politics has usurped morality?
That's a really good question. So as we were talking about pastors not being political advisors, which I think broadly a good idea that most people will agree with. There are levels on it. Because I'm magisterial at True Kingdom, I wouldn't have that same view that Stephen Wolfe would have or Horton or Van Drunen would have. But I still largely, I'm not a political philosopher. I don't have any great ideas. But you asked about, on the other side of that, though, politics replacing morality. I don't know if you were setting me up, but if you were, I appreciate it. Because I think this is why the magisterial position is so necessary. This is my biggest critique of what Caleb's going to talk about next week, of Christian nationalism seems to want to argue from natural law, general revelation, both for the fundamental principles. And they're going to argue for Christian fundamental principles, but they're not going to want those fundamental principles to come out of the Bible or to come from churches. And my worry about that, right, is that as much as I do not believe it's the church's job to levy taxes, punish evildoers, manage municipal goods, it is the job of the church as an institution to proclaim the truth to a dying world. And where the church stops doing that, you have, like you said, politics replacing universal truth, fundamental morality, with simply the art of what's possible. And so that would be, to my pitch, a reason why I would want to see, if you have this division of constitutional law and case law, I would say the magisterial position, the sphere of sovereignty position would say, you need the Bible for that fundamental truth. What is property? What is a man? What is a woman? What is a person? What is murder? What is a lie? We have to make those arguments from Scripture through the church, both institutionally and individually as Christians throughout the world. And theonomists would agree with that as well. And then I would agree with the particulars. Now I would say against theonomists, against some sphere of sovereignty, although they're all over the place. I would want general revelation, natural law, case law. In each time and place, I think it's what God wants. How do we know what this people need in this time and place? You look to the Bible's principles and you apply it specifically, and I think that's how you make sure that politics doesn't override morality, because the fundamentals come from God and from the Scriptures and from truth. But then the particulars are given to each people, a free people to decide for themselves. And so now we're kind of seeing where the things separate. So Caleb will make this argument next week, but his argument against, which I do agree with, again, part of the reason I'm passionate about this is I think I want the same things that Christian nationalists want. I just think I know the train that gets us there. And I don't think this is that train. But one of Caleb's critiques next week is going to be that Wolfian Christian nationalism is just that same problem of politics replacing morality in the other direction. And that's not actually better. Right? Right-wing politics devoid of scriptural basis is going to be every bit as unmoored and problematic as left-wing. Absolutely, right. And there are evidences of that, right? Like non-Christian conservatism and $5 will get you a cup of coffee, in my opinion. Not that we shouldn't make alliances. So I think it's a really good question. Again, I'll let Caleb get into more of that next week. We do want to present it fairly, because specifically American Southern Presbyterianism, R.L. Dabney, J.H. Thornwell, that really is, this is historical arguments that Wolfe is making. But I think it ends up with that same problem, which, now maybe, again, this is me slam dunking. So this is how you get slavery. Is you have basically said in the Hodge-Thornwell debates, which are these great back and forths in the 1830s and 1840s leading up to the war, between two of, I think, the greatest theologians that have ever lived, genuinely. But when they debate slavery, Hodge brings up man-stealing, Deuteronomy. Even if you didn't steal them, the people you brought them from stole them. Like, we know that, right? We know that it was very rarely Westerners going into African villages grabbing people. They would sail to the Horn of Africa, and those tribes would be like, would you like to buy some people? And they said, sure. Hodge goes, number one, that's man-stealing. Number two, look at how the Old Testament punishes accessory and accomplice. That's not a way out. And Thornwell's argument was, don't be bringing the Bible into civil politics, right? We should use natural revelation, natural law, but general revelation. And general revelation tells me that black people just aren't smart enough to govern themselves. So stop quoting the Bible, right? And I would say that would be an argument against. It's funny because sometimes I think we think that the Christian Bible argument is like the super right-wing argument. And even the right-wing, left-wing dichotomy is problematic for a lot of reasons. But actually, I would argue that either a magisterial or a sphere of sovereignty basis is going to prevent the political excess when we allow ourselves to be governed only by, or more majorly by, natural law. So that's a good question. Mr. Murdoch.
So I think in previous weeks we talked about this no neutrality.
Right. Yes.
I guess the question I would have is, it's not whether but which.
Right. Amen.
Right? It's not whether
Right.
the civil magistrate is going to officially support
Right.
or recognize a religion. So if it's not Christianity,
Right.
you know, it's going to be godless secularism, it's paganism,
Islam.
another demonic.
Right. Right.
How would you
Great question. Great question. So this would be part of my argument against establishmentarianism. Is the minute you allow the civil magistrate to establish something, if we're just being honest, if we're playing a math game, what are they probably going to establish? If the current president established a Christian religion, it looks like the head of it would be Paula White, who is a rank heretic. And she has other problems besides that. But I agree with your point. Fundamentally, Norm said there's no such thing as a religiously neutral. This is one of my critiques of R2K. And Wolf agrees with this, by the way. Like, he doesn't want it to be religiously neutral. He just wants it to come from general revelation, natural law. But he doesn't want them to be neutral either. I think what the American revisions do is they maintain, both in chapter 23 and in larger catechism, I think it's 149, the language from Isaiah of the civil magistrate as a nursing father. Which is, I think, interesting imagery both in Isaiah and in the confession. What fathers don't do is what mothers do. They don't give birth. They don't feed, right? What's the job of a father for a child? Twofold. Provision and protection. And I think that's what the American standards say, is that the civil magistrate has a duty to see that the church of our Lord does not suffer from a lack of provision. And it does that primarily through promoting, again, not enforcing, not legislating, but promoting Christianity as the public good. And as Christianity is promoted, we would see through social order, the churches are provided for. And then how is the church protected? Well, those who attack it are punished. This goes back to the idea of blasphemy laws, right? And so the magisterial two-kingdom position, and maybe I'm even advocating for, like, I was going to say Shexnet or Christian nationalism. Never put my name on anything, please, as long as I live. But I think that nursing father language is really good. So I do not want a religiously neutral state either. I want a civil magistrate that sees itself as a nursing father. And so it does not give birth to the church. It is not over the church. It does not feed the church and sustain the church. What it does is it provides for the church through promoting Christianity as a public good, and it then protects the church. And we would say neither of those things is happening right now, right? Of those two things, what's happening more right now? And oddly, I would say what the magistrate is doing now is it much more provides for the church than protects the church right now. How does it provide for the church? Does our civil magistrate still do transparently Christian things? Yes, all the time. One of them happens every year in November when the president gets up there, including Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and proclaims a national day of thanksgiving unto the Lord. Right, so if that's Christian nationalism, then Barack Obama is a Christian nationalist, which is what the liberals, any kind of Christianity. National Day of Prayer. There was one after 9/11, right, where the president say, like, everyone should be praying. And everyone's like, yeah, no, we should all be praying. So I think there are times in which we do see that the magistrate can promote Christianity. One thing people here might very well disagree with, and it might, again, you don't have to agree with me on this, but I was asked recently, like, I think it was some Twitter account, I don't know, like the Twitter account of the Department of Homeland Security said, we pray that God blesses our land, and they quoted a Bible verse. Great. That Bible verse is true. Is the Bible verse not true because you work for the Department of Homeland Security? Like, that's a problematic position for me. The minute you try to start helping people, you have to stop quoting the Bible. And so I think there's a lot of room for the civil magistrate to promote Christianity, to be transparently Christian, to make Christian arguments, without any form of adoption or enforcement. So I think we do have a little bit of provision still where we do transparently Christian things, National Day of Prayer, National Day of Thanksgiving. I would want a lot more of that, my position would be. And if that's Christian nationalism, then I'm a Christian nationalist. And then protection is what the government's not doing right now, right? We've seen recently journalists, which has become, you want to talk about a useless word now, journalist, barging into worship services. I believe in my heart of hearts, Isaiah 49 says the government should be punishing those people. Anyone who disrupts any worship service should be punished. They should be held criminally liable because it's the job of the civil magistrate to protect the church, right? And I would agree with Calvin where that doesn't mean that you need to protect anything that calls itself Christian. The civil magistrate doesn't need to be stupid to be a good civil magistrate. Oh, I'm a Christian, I just think that Jesus is a flying spaghetti monster. No, I don't think that counts. I don't have to think that counts. So there's even room here for understanding the civil magistrate's part. So that would be my pitch is I don't want the magistrate to be, I would not be an R2K guy, I don't want the magistrate to be religiously neutral. I just think by providing and protecting the church, what they do is they then, if anything, put the church in the best possible position to do its job, rather than in any way participate in the church doing its job. I don't want the civil magistrate participating. So I don't want the civil magistrate preaching. I don't want the civil magistrate sitting on the Council of Seattle. I don't want him calling a general synod. I don't want him weighing in on whether or not republication is bad covenant theology. I don't want him weighing in on whether or not, the Catholic Church does this. It threatens, like one conservative bishop somewhere in America always threatens the Catholic politicians with withholding communion. And I say threaten because they should just do that. Like they should actually do what they say they believe, right? And then you see people like, well, if the Catholic Church disciplines Joe Biden, then we should take away the Catholic. No. The civil magistrate should support the church doing church discipline. It should say that's the church's job, and we support them according to their own understanding doing that, right? Rather than interfering. So my pitch is I want a Protestant civil magistrate. I think we're going to get that much better and much sharper if there is not a state religion, is what I'm arguing against. But if there's more thoughts, keep them coming.
Say a third duty of
Yeah.
the father would be to bring your children up in the training and admonition of the Lord,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
That, in addition to providing and provision and protection.
So what I would say there is, analogies always fail. Not necessarily that I totally disagree with that, but I think the language in Isaiah and in our confession doesn't seem to include that idea. And the point there would be maybe, but if we're going to include it, and we got to come up with a P word because you know how I'm addicted to. I would do that if I knew how to spell it. Good. Proselytize. That's not bad. Maybe the mechanism here would be, again, I don't want the civil magistrate to be forced to not say that Jesus is Lord because they won an election. I think that's harmful. They can say Jesus is Lord. They can say if you read Eisenhower's farewell address, read Washington's farewell address, right? Read Lincoln's second inaugural. Lincoln's second inaugural address is a better sermon than most sermons in America right now. And it is a sermon if you read the second inaugural address. It is appeal from Scripture for people to act Christianly. So it's not that, to your point, that you totally lose your ability to proselytize, to prescribe a truth, but maybe the good picture here would be, what would a good parent do as a father to a kid is, and we talk about this a lot in elder training, the best thing a father can do for their kid is bring them to church, right? And bring them to the pastor. Not to undermine his theological authority, but to encourage his child to sit under God's appointed authority. And in the same way that a father or a home wouldn't baptize his own kids in his bathtub, a father in his home wouldn't give his kids communion in his own house, a father in his own home wouldn't excommunicate members of his household for disobeying him. Maybe that's the through connection here to the civil magistrate. Is that the way the civil magistrate makes sure his children are proselytized is by letting the church do it, right? And pointing them to the authority. Yes. Well, yeah.
Christian faith as opposed to, again, not whether but which, as opposed to any other?
So that would be, Norm's asking about, doesn't it necessitate a Christian faith? Our confession says to protect the church of our common Lord without giving preference to any denomination of Christians above the rest.
That's why I wouldn't even say Protestant, I would just say
Broadly Christian.
broadly Christian
Right.
faith.
I think Witherspoon would agree with you. I think that's fair. It's fair to say Islam was a whisper of an idea. I mean, they knew it existed. They would end up fighting them pretty soon. We were just with the Barbary pirates. How does the chapter 23 apply to non-Christian religions? Norm, I think it's very fair to say the magisterial position, the American Westminsterian position, would probably only apply, to your point, to Christian denominations, which I think is a very fair and good argument to make. And I will be honest, I don't know. I'm very in favor of this. I don't know where I am on, American religious tolerance as it applies to non-Christian religions. I am doing the reading, as our licentiates would say before Presbyterian when they don't know how to answer the question. They would go, Norm, that was a great question. I really want to ask my session, and I want to read more about that, on these kind of ways they do to get out of the question. But I think it's a very good point, Norm, and I think what you're saying is definitely would be the opinion of American Presbyterians. Would be this applies to Christians, not to non-Christians.
One of the views of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, but the founders were really talking about the establishment of a Christian denomination.
Right, absolutely true.
It was assumed that it was Christianity,
100%.
right?
Right.
And not the establishment of Islam or a non-Christian faith.
Right. No, so Norm's absolutely right. What they were concerned about is the Anglican Church being the official church of America, because all the European countries had state churches. So the Anglican Church, England, it's an adjective for English, right? And so the Church of England is what it's called. The Church of Scotland is a Presbyterian church. And up until pretty recently, they were probably kind of like the best state church. They've gone liberal recently, unfortunately. The Hungarian state church is a transparently reformed church that has also gone very liberal and weak, unfortunately. So you're absolutely right. What they were concerned about is one Protestant denomination gaining authority over the others. And obviously, famously, we need to remember the Bill of Rights applies to the federal government. So this always happens when It's so like when someone gets kicked off an airplane for yelling terrible things, they go, "What about freedom of speech?" And you're like, that doesn't apply. That's not how that works. And so furthermore, we should say, as I mentioned, that the majority of the colonies had state churches at the state level when the First Amendment was ratified.
Those are state denominations.
Yes, right, yeah. So Maryland was an Anglican colony, and Georgia and South Carolina were very Baptist and Methodist. And the Presbyterians ended up what we call the middle colonies, so that would have been New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And those became very Presbyterian colonies. And the Scots in North Carolina were down there too. So Yeah, and so my argument was what you do see really rapidly, though, is most of those the states end up shedding their state denominations within the next 50 years. My argument is because they get more reformed, not because they get less reformed. Because again, I think Protestant social conscience increases from 1787 to 1860. Like people are becoming more committed, and you see that in the national language among the politicians. We elect a Dutch Reformed ruling elder president. Anyone know who I'm talking about? It's killing me. The most fun president name of all time, Martin Van Buren. Yeah, basically believes everything we believe. So to your point, it's about establishing a Protestant domination. My larger pitch. So that's what I've been. I mean, if I need to clarify that, thank you, Norm, for asking. That's what I've been arguing against, is because I see a lot of Christian nationalist advocates, both of the Wolfian general equity and of the theonomic thing, arguing, no, we should bring back state-by-state denomination state churches. And my pitch is, no, that's bad. And obviously the First Amendment makes that impossible at the federal level, but I've seen Christian nationalists on Twitter argue in favor of repealing the First Amendment, right? Because they want to have a nationalized church. So that's what I've been arguing against. I have not been arguing against that the civil magistrate should be Christian. It will either be Christian or it will be anti-Christian. Those are the only two positions that exist in the world, or Christian or anti-Christian. But my argument is that the church is going to make us Christian more powerfully when the civil magistrate provides for, protects the church, points people. There we go. That would be my third P. Points. I absolutely want all of this very, very badly. And explicitly a Christian full of Christians saying we need to make sure the church is provided for, we need to be broadly Protestant, we need to protect the church from those who would attack it, we need to point people towards it. We're just not going to be involved in the specifics. All right, here first and then Bill.
I just wanted to say I appreciate how you presented this conversation about Christian nationalism, because I've always wanted to hear about it in
Yeah.
a more mature setting. But I'm typically hearing about it from people like Doug Wilson. which
Right.
Everyone has mixed feelings about.
Right.
I feel like sometimes then the conversation just gets very stressful.
Right? Yeah, I appreciate the kind words. I think again, Christian nationalism is a very recent American movement, and it should be understood well rather than either adopted or rejected out of hand. And so again, my general thesis is I wouldn't use the term. If it makes Christian nationalists feel better, I also don't like the word evangelical. I am obviously an evangelical. Like whatever definition of evangelical is, I am one. If it's the political definition, if it's the religious definition, I'm obviously an evangelical. But that term I also think has become so totally corrupted as it become meaningless. And more often than not, evangelical means not reformed now. And so, okay, well then I don't want to use that word no more. So, but am I an evangelical? Yes. And so it could very well be possible. What I'm arguing against is I'm arguing against using the term Christian nationalism, and I want to specifically argue against some of these forms of this movement. But then you look at my oeuvre, to use a fancy word, that I want a Protestant social order. I think the Westminster Standards want a Protestant social order. They want a Christian magistrate that points people to the church and protects the church. And so I would think any non-Christian would call me a Christian nationalist, right? And so it's just, again, talking about the issues without it being connected to a certain person, problematic, not problematic. I do think Doug's problematic. Just get that out there. But yeah, that's a good point. Bill. Okay.
I'm trying to kind of put together like a cohesive vision of what you're
Yes.
talking about here. We're talking about a nation that is, like if you were overseas looking at America, you'd see a nation that was predominantly Protestant in its, in the way that it acts, in its social customs.
I would say in everything, to be fair, right? That's kind of the point here. A totality of national action. I think that's what people would have seen in America in 1787.
Good.
Yeah.
And you want a civil magistrate who provides, protects, and points people to the church.
Right.
For the things that are clearly by Scripture under the authority of the church.
Right.
Without using civil laws as the means to accomplish that end.
Right.
I'm just kind of struggling, I guess, with the idea of would do providing, protecting, and pointing to the church, you're not going to get a Christian to do that. And so then, if we're in this position, let's say you said you want Christianity to win. So if Christianity wins,
It will, but go ahead. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
sooner rather than later.
Right. Amen.
You mentioned a few classes ago that you think that the brightest day of whatever term we're going to use instead of Christian nationalism is still yet to come.
Right.
Because we're better at now than we used to be. And so if that day comes and it happens before Christ returns, would you still say, if we were a predominantly Protestant Christian nation with predominantly Protestant Christian politicians and civil magistrates, would you still say that they should, by principle and by conviction, resist Canadian laws in order to promote those things because of the downstream effects that might come from them? Or
Right.
if we get to that point where we're in this national Christian state,
Right.
then it'd be appropriate to make laws.
Great question. I'll repeat it a little bit. He projected well. If we're going to be a Protestant people with Protestant ideas, Protestant theology, Protestant culture, is there a point where we just get to make explicitly Protestant laws? This is terminology that comes. I don't know if it was Kissinger, but it's around that time period, so it's not perfect terminology. Maybe what can be helpful here is the difference between what we call soft power and hard power. Magistrates, actually everyone in authority has both. They inarguably have both. Maybe it's easiest to think of the United States of America in our soft power and our hard power. Our hard power is the 101st Airborne, and it's a good airborne, right? And it's the USS Enterprise, and it's all those kind of things. That's the hard power of the United States. The soft power of the United States is a lot of things. Hollywood, for better or for worse, and it's almost entirely for worse, Hollywood is a part of the soft power of the United States. It goes out into the world and it Americanizes the world. People want to be like America because of Hollywood. It's fashion and it's money and it's the English language. And there are all these soft power ways that America has influence. And so you see the relationship of soft power and hard power with the current war in Iran. For a very long time, America used entirely soft power with the threat of hard power, but it was do this and we'll give you money, right? Don't do this, we'll give you money. Do this, we'll give you money. And then the current president felt at a certain time that soft power was insufficient to meet his aims, and so now he is using hard power, which were guided surface-to-air missiles and tomahawks and suicide dolphins, apparently. That was a thing. So that was a real thing. So the magistrate has both. My argument here is that I would have the magistrate use largely soft power rather than hard power, but that's not necessarily a hard and fast law with civil laws. So one thing I agree, I think Stephen Wolfe makes a very compelling argument for, Sabbath laws and blasphemy laws don't require Scripture. Specifically, the Sabbath is a creation ordinance. Every human being has an innate knowledge of it, like they do that it's wrong to cheat on your wife, or like that I need to get up and do my job, right? And so he makes an argument, Calvin makes this argument, I think a compelling argument, that Sabbath laws are not ecclesiastical laws. We are not choosing one sect of Christianity by enforcing a Sabbath law. Now, it's true in America that most American denominations now have changed their position on the Sabbath. And change I mean that. Like, you go back 120 years ago, and you will find almost every Protestant denomination having some kind of Sabbath understanding. So right now, it would feel like Miles Smith, who I respect, he would disagree. He'd go, no, if we had Sabbath laws, that's you choosing Presbyterians. And we'd say, well, I agree with you that Presbyterians are doing great and that we still hold the Sabbath, but there's nothing Presbyterian about the Sabbath argument. It does not require paedobaptism. It does not require covenant theology or Presbyterian government. It's a creation ordinance. So this is why I would even say I'm entirely in favor of Sabbath laws and blasphemy laws. These are creation ordinances. All men know, Romans 1 says, that they owe their Creator obedience. No one should blaspheme ever. That's not a Christian denominational opinion. And so the magisterial position would not be at all against some civil laws that might be again, if that's Christian nationalism, then sign me up. If Sabbath laws and blasphemy laws are Christian nationalism, then not only am I a Christian nationalist, but every American politician before 1880 was a Christian nationalist. I cited this book a lot, Destiny of the Republic, and it's a fascinating book about James Garfield. And there's a point, I think it's the 1880 or 1876 Republican Convention, and the main party, the corrupt party, is losing. And it's Saturday night at 11:30. And they know that they're losing. And they know if it goes to another day, then they're definitely going to lose. And so the head, Conklin was his name, he was a senator from New York. He's like, we have to vote right now. This is my last chance. And some random senator from Maine stood up and he goes, I am deeply offended, sir, because America is a Sabbath-keeping nation, and I am a Sabbath-keeping man, and the idea that we would have a convention on a Sunday offends me. How dare you? And they shut it down on the spot. That was not like a Presbyterian pastor, y'all. I don't even think I was really a Christian. That was just where we were. So kind of to your answer, I think, again, I probably should have clarified earlier that my argument against establishmentarianism was specifically against either the federal or state or city governments choosing a certain denomination of Christianity. That's what I'm arguing against. Not arguing against them being Christian, because I'm a magisterial guy. And I would say you can pass a great many civil laws that do zero injury to people's religious freedom. Sabbath laws do not make you go to church on Sunday. They do not make you be a Presbyterian. They don't stop you from being a Jew. They just tell you to keep a creation ordinance, which everyone has to keep anyway, which you're being punished for not keeping. I mean, the discipline of the Lord is heavy upon you. So that's a good question, Bill, and I think that would be my argument. A really good picture of this, if you're interested in the two-kingdom argument against what I'm saying, is there's a podcast by Kevin Young called Life, Books, and Everything. It's my favorite podcast on theology. He interviewed David Van Drunen about a year ago, and he asked these questions. And again, David Van Drunen, I really respect, really godly guy. He was at our last Presbyterian meeting. I talked to him again. He asked David Van Drunen, he goes, okay, we convert Elon Musk. This is the end of the interview. We convert Elon Musk. He goes, we convert him to the PCA. And Van Drunen goes, OPC, because he's an OPC guy. You're like, yeah, way to go, DVD. He says, yeah, okay, Elon becomes a member of the OPC. And he figures out how to colonize Mars. And he goes, only Orthodox Presbyterians on Mars. No Lutherans, no Baptists. The only people who get to go to Mars are Presbyterians. Kevin Young goes, if it was only Reformed Presbyterians on Mars, would you have Sabbath laws? And David Van Drunen said, no. So that's a good picture of the two kingdom positions. No, they really genuinely believe never, right? And I think it's an acceptable position. It's not one I agree with. But that would be opposite what I'm saying. But I'm also saying don't go so far as to establish a denomination. Or if not a denomination, what I also see people doing, I think that you can accidentally establish a denomination by the magistrate going too far in their civil laws. So rather than just a Sabbath law or a blasphemy law, they can have a law that no one's allowed to read the Book of Common Prayer. Well, that's not choosing a denomination, but you sure are hurting the Anglicans, right? Or you can have a national law that a confession of faith is required for baptism. Well, you didn't pick a denomination, but you ruled a lot of us out. And so what I'm arguing against is establishmentarianism, is picking a denomination of religion, or also doing laws that effectually do that, right? So this is me as a Presbyterian saying, I do not want a paedo-baptist law, right? I do not want the United States of America to insist on paedo-baptism. I think that would be a mistake. Not that anyone's arguing for that, and certainly not Wolf or Rick Garris or anyone like that. Yeah.
You oppose a law that would prohibit the establishment of Islamic mosques?
I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I wish I did. It's very popular to say no to mosques. I don't know. I wouldn't want it to be federally decided. I would want it to be decided by local governments. I don't think that local governments are under any obligation by God to grant Muslims land to build mosques, right? Where if the town of, what's that one north of Fountain Hills that ran out of water? If they go, Rio Verde, someone applies for building permits a mosque and the town council of Rio Verde says no, I think that's within their rights to do that. Is it wise? I don't know. Would I protest it as a citizen of Rio Verde if they denied the building permit? I would not protest it. I would probably sleep fine. But I don't know. That's one of the reasons why I'm not a civil magistrate. Terry.
What does it benefit Christian nationalists to have a nation that assimilates to social customs and yet denies Christ?
Ooh, good question. Yes. So what does it benefit Christian nationalism or a Christian nationalist to have a people in a place that adheres to Protestant social customs but does not believe in Jesus? And I would say two things. One, just the way you phrased it, and so I'll take the easy answer is it benefits me because my children are safer and because my neighbors are safer. And I believe, I don't want to get too graphic or anything, but the life expectancy of a homosexual man is 20 to 25 years shorter than a heterosexual man. So my neighbors will live longer. My kids will be safer. The poor will be better cared for in a broader social consensus because anti-Christian ideas like Marxism and the localization, the destruction of private property, those things won't happen, and people will be. So one, it'll be better for me and my family, which part of what a polis, a public sphere is all of us advocating for. This is what Ludwig von Mises called human interest. Like all I can do is say, this is what I think is best in a free society, and so I have every right to advocate what's best for me and my family. And so this would be best for me and my family as a free citizen. But my next answer would be, it would be best for my neighbors. They would have more human flourishing if they lived under a Protestant social order. So they would not go to heaven, which would be a tragedy. But their life, they would have more grain, and their life would be longer. And I think that can be a faithful application of common grace. The rain falls on the just and on the unjust. And God tells Jeremiah to seek the good of the city in which I've placed you. And he's talking about Babylon, which what happens to Babylon? But there was still, according to God's counsel to his people, when they sought the good of the city in Babylon, that had genuine value.
And my
Yeah.
follow-up question would be, as we know, sin nature is still active in a different way with believers and non-believers.
Yes.
Doesn't that essentially just put homosexuals back in the closet and all kinds of other horrible things that
Yes.
did occur? It's not like suddenly,
Right.
you know.
No, right. Yeah, right.
Prior-
Yeah, postmodernism did not create homosexuality. Right.
I think, so I'm just curious, I mean, do you
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
about that?
Yeah, so sin is inevitable. Human sin nature is inevitable. What I would say is a bigger thing I would disagree with would be what you heard the Democratic Party say for a long time. They don't say it anymore. But what they used to say was abortion should be, everyone knows it right away, safe, legal, and rare. No. No. It should never, ever happen, ever. And so their argument was, well, if you do that, then there's going to be unsafe abortions. And my argument is the best way to not have an unsafe abortion is to not have an abortion, right? A forced abortion is a terrible crime. It's murder, and we punish that. But the civil magistrate does not have a duty to make sure that you engage in sin in a safe way, right? The best way to not have an unsafe abortion is to not have an abortion. And so in the same way that I wouldn't agree with safe, legal, and rare with abortion, I would also not agree with safe, legal, and rare in terms of homosexuality. I mean, you're right. I think what you're making is a very good point, is that we have to accept that what the civil magistrate cannot do is change hearts, create righteousness. Amen. And that would be, our problem with the Catholic understanding of civil magistrate is, they're just another wing of the church. But what I would say is broadly speaking, it is better for something to be discouraged and to be unlawful than to be lawful and rare. And I will fully admit that's a change in my own thinking. I used to be much more libertarian. That doesn't make libertarians wrong because I've changed my mind on it. But that would have been my position if you asked me about the legalization of drugs 20 years ago was, oh man, we're losing the drug war. And now I'm as a pastor, I'll just say, we've had both at Calvin and at Providence multiple counsel situations in which someone's been using marijuana, and the track record is 100% life-destroyingly negative. And you go, life-destroying? I'm like, no, life-destroying. Marriage-destroying, career-destroying is univocal. And it's been Billy can back me up on this, dozens of times now. Mild marijuana use results in the destruction of marriage. And so now at this point I'm like, no, right? I don't care that it's still going to happen. It is destroying the lives of people. It should be illegal. And that it is going to be hard for us to wage war against sin, I guess I would just say is kind of the battle we have to put up with. But I respect where you're coming from. This is what I think would be the benefit of natural law debates is like, but what's the best way to, like, let's be honest, we're not going to fix this problem. And there can certainly be, just using the drug situation as a larger example of this, right, is there are certainly situations where our attempts to fix this problem were unwise and unhelpful, right? And so I would argue that mandatory minimums have largely been a jurisprudence disaster, right? Because it's taken sentencing out of the hands of the people that were trained and elected to sentence people. It's punished certain people disproportionately, and you can argue that those laws were designed to punish different people disproportionately. So I think even if I still think, no, it should still be illegal, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying, Terry, about this is where natural law comes in saying, how can we do this in a way that's not going to be totally destructive? But it's a problem. And I just want to bring up something we've talked about before. I thought it was a good point just for you all to consider. And I would just say this is a trade-off worth trading off. But you brought up before, this is a real trade-off. If you have a broadly Christian nation, what you're going to have that you don't have in a non-Christian nation is people thinking they're Christian when they're not. We are absolutely going to have that way more often in this situation. And someone thinking they're a Christian when they're not a Christian is a problem. It's bad. And I will say that's something I ran into the South a lot. Right? My granddaddy built this church. My dad's a deacon. Like, what do you mean I'm not a Christian? And I go, what do you mean you're a Christian? You've never been in church in your life. You're sleeping with your girlfriend. You went to a Megan Thee Stallion concert last night. Like, what are you telling me you're a Christian? I don't even know who that is, by the way. I just know there's no way that's a good thing. I would just say, I mean, to your point, Terry, those are real problems. There's no use pretending like we're not going to eradicate sin. We'll create new problems with more enforcement, and we'll create an entirely new problem with people thinking they're Christian when they're not. My just pitch, I think the magisterial pitch would be, I would rather have that problem. And a good wise friend of mine said sometimes wisdom is just choosing which problems you're going to have to live with, because we can't actually solve them all. You're just like, which problem do I want to deal with? I saw someone else's hand. Yes.
But it's not like we're saying you just wake up one day and suddenly all this is being enforced and all these people are against it. Isn't the idea more that it's the focus of Christians continuing to live as Christians in the world and kind of on a local level in our churches and families and like wherever we're involved kind of pursuing this?
It's a great question. So you asked, it's not just 0 to 100, all of a sudden now we're all Christian nationalists tomorrow. This will kind of be a lot more next week, and then really our last week, which is the week after that. How do we get there? And this is another thing each one of the schools are going to argue differently. So Christian nationalism, even though it is kind of an outgrowth of the magisterial position, but it's a wing of it. I mean, nothing's neat boxes, but magisterial know that you need to teach the magistrate, they need to be taught what truth is, there need to be these fundamentals. Wolfian Christian nationalism is going to be through natural law, and they're going to say that, okay, so what we need to do is we need to start passing Christian laws in Oklahoma and Alabama and Texas, and you pass the laws where you can pass them, and then those areas get better, and those areas grow, and they gain more power, and then other people want to be like them. So now, what's next to Oklahoma? Colorado, Utah? Nothing outside of Arizona matters. How about Kansas? Kansas goes, oh, I want some of that, right? And so maybe soft power projects, or people just get up and leave. They leave California, they go to Texas. So the Wolfian Christian nationalism is going to be arguing, no, good magistry is how we fix this problem, right? And they're not going to say, stop preaching the gospel. One of the things I appreciate about Wolf, I have some things I disagree with him with pretty severely, but he has a pretty high view of the power of the church to convert sinners, right? The R2K position would be like, that's all we do. Not all we do, but that's the answer is we just preach the gospel. Every single one of us goes preach the gospel. The sphere sovereignty would be Christians go influence the culture. We make Christian businesses and Christian schools, and we make Christian art and Christian arguments, and that's how we transform it. And the magisterial position is going to be like, it's the church as an institution. And so it's going to involve some evangelism, but it's also going to be involved the church teaching and proclaiming and going out and growing. And so you can see how there are different mechanisms. We all want the flourishing of our neighbors. We all want people to come to the Lord. But to your point, each one of these schools has a different way of getting there, while having a fundamental Protestant agreement that we need to preach the gospel. People need to become Christians.